Hello, everybody. Paul here with thevoiceformen.com, and welcome to Interviews, where tonight I'm going to be talking with Jonathan Taylor of thevoiceformalestudents.com. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and jump into it. Jonathan, you want to just say hi to everybody so we can get started?
Hey, folks. How's it going?
That's Jonathan Taylor. Let's just start with some background. One day, I don't even remember what it was, and it's probably because of the nature of my schedule being so crazy. I don't remember timelines very well at all, but in just poking around the internet and doing the course of my regular work, I stumbled on this website that said A Voice for Male Students. I thought, well, somebody at least know how to choose a name for a website. I thought, man, that's excellent. So I went and checked it out, and it was no joke. Saw some great writing there, great information, and real concern for what's happening with our young men on college campuses. Turned out it was Jonathan Taylor's website. So why don't you just let people know so we can go back to the beginning and get them up to speed. What in your background, what led you to becoming interested in men's issues in general to begin with, and then specifically about what's happening with college-age men?
Well, I first got kind of tuned into gender issues whenever I was whenever I became a teacher in higher ed. I was teaching at A&M University, and I was also taking master's classes at the time. I was teaching basic college-level classes. And I saw a lot of stuff that was being talked about gender issues in education, and it just didn't sound right in my gut, for one thing. And also, I looked into it even more, and what was like the go-to narrative on gender issues really had, I thought, a very shaky intellectual foundation. And so I thought that at the time I didn't really have too much of a concept of gender issues, but I did have a concept of academic integrity, and the more I looked into what I thought was just this pervasively, was just a little more than intellectual fraud in a lot of academic circles. I learned that there was a lot of bias that came with that, and then I discovered how pervasive the problem was. That really got me started on the issues, and then the more I learned, the more I learned that there was to learn. It's just a really big issue, and there's so much to it. So that kind of got me started on it, and yeah, got the ball rolling.
Well, what were some of the more pervasive issues that you saw when you started doing this digging into the issues and the academic fraud, which most of our audience is already going to know is just rampant? But when it came to the issues that were affecting either boys or young men, what were the ones that stood out to you that said, hey, wait a minute, this has got my attention?
One of them was just how often men and boys are demonized as via rape hysteria, which is just so blatant in so many areas in academia, higher education especially. There just isn't any balance to the conversation. And another area is just the complete radio silence on how much on the educational underachievement of men and boys. And there's just radio silence on that. And then you look at, women and girls are actually doing very well, but it's like people trip over themselves to give them more. You just look at this huge gulf chasm in how men and women as a group are treated. Those were two big things that opened my eyes. And there's some good stuff that's been developing over the last few years, but there hasn't the mainstream academic culture just hasn't really changed. And so, I mean, that keeps providing the incentive for me to, come back and, keep talking about these issues.
Yeah, we found out a little bit about that, there has been some progress, but we've also found out that there's a long way to go, and we found that out recently. On November 1st, I had the pleasure of taking a short drive with Jonathan from Houston to Atlanta, actually to Kennesaw, Georgia, to attend the Kennesaw State University men's and speak at their conference, Male Students in Peril. And that was preceded at that campus by university protest, and there was all kinds of really underhanded stuff going on with the character assassination of Sage Gerard, many attempts to shut this thing down or to intimidate Sage out of even having a conference. And I got to wonder, and I'm going to ask your opinion on it, what on earth is going on in our colleges and universities that have so much women-centric stuff? I mean, there's women's studies and there's women's resource centers and all sorts of stuff. And the moment that men want to actually stand up and talk about their own issues, there's like this collective freak out in an attempt to stop it. What's going on with that in our colleges?
Well, I mean, you mentioned at the conference recently in Kennesaw, Georgia, that feminism is kind of a religion. You know, it's kind of a it's just this dogma that you can't question. And you know, people conceptualize, you know, feminism in academia, especially as, you know, sort of like the one true way to gender equality and things like that. There's no there's no real conceptualization that, you know, maybe, you know, there are different, I don't know if you want to call it denominations, but, you know, different ways of looking at gender that don't conflict with the notion of equality. But you know, feminism, you know, I got to say, they've been at it for a long time, and, you know, things just tend to snowball over the years. And, you know, it started really snowballing in the 90s, I think, and it's still snowballed quite a bit right now. But thankfully, we are starting to throw up a little bit of resistance to, you know, to what's going on. And, you know, we aren't anywhere near snowballing ourselves yet. But you know, give us another, you know, 10, 15 years. We'll see where we're at. I think we'll be doing pretty good.
I think so too. I'm shooting for 5. I think that's probably unrealistic, but this is really probably 100 years journey when it comes to men's issues. But speaking of what you were talking about with feminism, I mean, this is a little bit of a side road, but I wanted to ask your opinion on this. There's still a lot of debate in the men's advocate community about the nature of feminism. Is there any such thing as a good feminism? Does real equity feminism exist in any meaningful way? Or are we just dealing with corruption that is so rampant and across the isolated incidents of true gender equity feminists are just not enough to redeem that ideology? So can we build bridges with feminists, or is it just out of the question? I know that's putting you on the spot, but that's what I like to do. So if you take a shot at that.
All right. No. It's a good question. It's an excellent question. But really, you know, let me give you an example. The other day I was looking at the website clothingboys.net. It's a website by a woman named Jennifer Fink. She's a former principal in lower education. She claims to be a feminist. She's got a blog running there about you know, boys' education issues. But you know, she doesn't really talk too much about things like misandry on her website. You know, she expresses some degree of compassion for men and boys. And you know, I do appreciate that element, that side. She's a mother of, I think, 4 boys herself, but she's just not going to address some of the more problematic elements of, you know, how did all this come to be? You know, it didn't just fall out of the sky. You know, all of these problems that we're dealing with, and it's not going to be resolved by us remaining oblivious to it. So you know, I mean, I think that she is, you know, there are some feminists who are sympathetic, but unfortunately they're so marginal within feminism as a movement. You know, it's not just the people who call themselves feminists, it's also the part of feminism that is actually moving. The part of feminism that is actually moving, you know, unfortunately I just don't see a lot there that really gives promise to any kind of meaningful bridge that could be built, because the reality is that feminism, no matter what genre of feminism you have, The mainstream establishment feminism today, it's all about, patriarchy. That's the central theme. And there's no way around it. They may say, well, there's different schools of feminism. Well, all that really means is there's different ways of believing that we live in a patriarchy. And what does patriarchy mean? Well, basically it means that women are always the bigger victim, in life, in general. And if you come out with that point of view, if you truly do believe that, then you're never, if there ever comes a time in the world, where men and women suffer at, even relatively equal rates, you're still going to look at their experiences as less than what they really are, if you come from that feminist perspective. And so, feminism as a movement really can't, it's not possible in a world in which both men and women suffer, and especially in a world in which men suffer more than women, and there's a debate to be had around that as well. It's not possible for feminism to be anything other than a supremacist movement. It's just not possible, given that they won't give up the central tenet of patriarchy, and they won't give that up because if they ever did, feminism would cease to have any kind of fervor, religious fervor as a movement, and it would, in my opinion, cease to exist.
Well, that's a relatively attractive option, if you ask me. So how do we prevent the men's movement, which is obviously, there's no doubt, now we do have a men's movement that's growing in this culture. It's really happening. It's not as fast as any men's advocate I know would like to have. From ending up on the same sort of sorry road of victim politics and the oppression Olympics and social justice warrior mentality that's been dominating feminism for 40 to 50 years.
Okay, and you kind of cut out there. You want to say how do we keep from being like that, basically?
Yeah. Basically, how do we keep from ending up where feminism is now with the men's movement? Because that's certainly, I know a lot of men's advocates, and I don't know anybody that wants a supremacist movement. Mm-hmm. But obviously, it's possible when you're talking about gender activism to end up as a supremacist movement as feminism is now. So how do we stop that from happening?
Well, for one thing, I really do think it would be harder for us to do that than it was for feminism to do that. Because I don't think the biological incentives are there. We tend to respond to women's pain much more than men's pain in an empathetic way. And really, the reality is that people, I think that there is a significant segment of society that genuinely wants something different. They don't want, feminism for men. They want something that's different, that's genuinely different. And so, I think, so long as we present that, and so long as, I think that you've done, I think that Voice for Men has done some good work in including some of the women who are like-minded, who are, of the human rights perspective in its ranks. And the stuff that I see is very promising because, take a look at the men who are a part of the feminist movement. And take a look at how they just how they carry themselves and how they respond, how they navigate through the dialogue on gender issues. A lot of the time, these men are like they have to apologize for their own existence. Like, oh, I feel guilty for being a man. If I ever hear a woman say, oh, I feel guilty for being a woman after seeing these horrible things that feminists do, I'm like, no, you shouldn't be like that. It's not your fault, that these feminists are doing that unless you did stuff like that, individually. But it's just because you're born with a uterus doesn't make you bad. Just like if you're born with a penis doesn't make you bad. But you see those differences between feminism and the men's movement. The pro-feminist men's movement. It's like they can't actually call themselves feminists because they don't believe that they're worthy enough to speak to women's experiences. But the women of the men's movement they aren't like that. That they just don't have that kind of guilt complex, if you will, that the men of the feminist movement do. And so I think that's very promising already.
And I think you may have a real point there because, I think I probably misspoke. I said what has dominated feminism for the past 40 or 50 years. If you look at the record, you go back to Seneca Falls in 1852, the women that gathered there at the first women's conventional holy of holies for the women's movement, the birth of everything, of the suffrage movement and the push for women's rights. Men attended to support that, and when they showed up, they were told to sit in the back of the room and keep their mouths shut, and they did. So it's like, despite our maybe our pictures in our mind of a rough and tumble, old, rugged West, the hens ruled the roost on the women's movement from the beginning, and it still does. And I agree with you. I find myself completely embarrassed sometimes for the men in the feminist movement for the walking, living, breathing apologies they are. It's sad, and I'm not sure what to do about it except don't be that guy.
Yeah, there you go. Oh man, yeah.
So let's move on a little bit. What do you plan to do? What do you have, like? And I'm just sort of a stupid job interview question, but I'm going to ask it. Do you have a plan, like where you would like to see yourself, or where you would like to see a voice for male students, or what you would like to see happen in the next 5 years?
Yeah, really what we need to do, I think, and I think you and I are very much in agreement, I think we need to foster as many men's issues groups on the college campus as we possibly can. I think that's, we got to start with the stuff that's going to get us traction. And, if you appeal, if we were to direct the majority of our efforts appealing to teachers, to administrators, to people whose bread is buttered on the side of, the establishment in academia, we're just not going to get anywhere. We're not going to get anywhere near the bang for our buck as if we were appealing to students, because, students, they at least, they're not set in their ways as much as some people who are, way on up there. They still retain an open mind. They're still, some of them are fresh from high school and still have that fiery, sort of like a fiery, rebellious spirit, which can be a good thing to have, especially in this case. And so I think, really just really trying to reach out to the students, really trying to empower the students. I think that's where we need to be pushing for, so really, the establishment of men's issues groups, more of them will be a key issue. Raising awareness is always a good thing. I want to hopefully see more and more legal challenges against schools that violate the rights of men and boys, particularly in due process areas, and we will continue to provide them with a lot of the tools for that. We have that database of lawsuits at our
let's talk a little more about the database you have on your websites. Tell people exactly what you're storing in this database. And by the way, on the Google Plus page, there's a link to Jonathan's database there. And the moment this video closes, there will be one in the low bar. We get most of our viewers come in randomly after the show. When you get here, if you're watching it after we've aired it, you will find a link in the low bar to Jonathan's database, where he's collecting all these lawsuits over false accusations, isn't it?
Yeah, we're up to 50 right now that we know of. And I do believe that there's a lot more out there that we just haven't picked up yet. I'm working with there's a group of lawyers that I'm in regular contact with, and they'll send me updates for the cases that they're working on. They'll send me new cases, and I'll update it with that. So thankfully, it's not just me working on this. It's actually a group of people. I'm the one who puts the database together, but I do have help in gathering the information. But what this database really is, the significance of it, it's really a map. You can almost call it like a battle map of sorts, if you will. And it tells people really just how to go about making, a good place to start in making legal challenges to the universities, because they can go and they can look up these lawsuits by state. by school, the year they were filed. They can look up the attorneys that have been representing and successfully representing them. They can look up the legal complaints, and they can look up, which charges were filed and which of those were dropped and which of those actually, went all the way through the legal process and which ones were successful. They can really, there's so much stuff there that it's not just for I think it helps in so many ways because as I was talking to you earlier, a lot of young men, they have this habit of they're kicked out of their schools. They're kind of just blindsided by this process that many of them never knew existed, and they think they're alone. And the reality is that far too often they are alone. But by seeing that there are a lot of other people who've gone through this, they'll start thinking, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe there is, maybe this is a bigger issue. And they'll see, hey, there have been successful legal challenges, and maybe I can do what these guys did. So
let's talk about that process a little bit, and it goes back to, there has been problems predating the Dear Colleague letter, but let's say that we've got a sort of a watershed moment for the elimination of civil rights of young men in schools with the Dear Colleague letter, which was issued by the Department of Education in Obama administration in April of 2011, that literally instructed schools that they had to reduce evidence standards, that they strongly discouraged those accused from being able to question the alleged victims, that a really big undermining of due process and civil rights for young men who were accused of sexual assault on campus, and officially putting felony sexual assaults in the hands of untrained or poorly trained staff, faculty, and sometimes students who were not trained in how to gather and process evidence, or not trained in due process. And so we've ended up now with 50 lawsuits of young men who say that they were unfairly kicked out by honor courts who found by a preponderance of the evidence that they were guilty of the charges against them. And 50 lawsuits represents a lot more victims than 50 in my book. It's not like that every young man that's had this happen has filed a lawsuit. There's a lot of them that feel like they can't afford to, or that can't afford to, and there's a lot of them that just don't know that there is an option for them to seek correction through the legal system. This is a real important thing to me, because these schools have, and this is, I think, directly tied to feminist ideology, these schools need to pay a price. Jonathan said that one of the biggest things we could do, and he's right, is to start forming men's issues group on campus, where one, they can be told how bad things are, because they don't realize, like he said, until something happens to them. But the other thing we can do, other than form these groups, is encourage young men who have been maligned and mistreated, who've lost their education, because when they kick you out, usually in these honor trials, honor courts they call them, you lose your tuition, you lose everything, you're just gone, you're just expelled, and that's it, you're done, your academic career is all but over. And don't you think that if we make these schools pay a price for this kind of treatment for the sake of gender politics and ideology, that we will eventually get their attention when they start writing checks?
Yeah, and right now, in a lot of cases, there have been settlements, and if you look at the trend of lawsuits and the settlements that have been awarded, a lot of them are confidential settlements, so you can't really tell. But based upon my conversations with the attorneys that I've been talking to, the settlements, the amount awarded from these settlements is steadily increasing over time. So originally it's just kind of a pinprick, in the hands of administrators. But eventually, and we will eventually get to the point where they will have to start shelling out the big bucks for this kind of thing, and paying a real price for that. And it's going to get harder for them to justify, writing out, paying for the legal process. Even if they don't, even if they win in court, they still lose, because they still have to pay a legal price for going through the process. still have to, in a lot of cases, there's going to be increasingly us. We're going to be talking about their schools, and they're going to lose reputation through that. Reputation and money. It's really kind of like drugs. I think that academics and administrators are addicted to, I really do think that, and that they really can't live without that. And so eventually, we're going to start hitting them pretty hard. And not only that, one of the other things, to answer more of your question earlier, one of the things that I hope we see changing more and more is that these cases will start working themselves up through the higher courts as well. Because what we really need are a set of new legal precedents coming down from the higher courts that define the limits of administrative power. You see, what happened, how a lot of this has sort of come about, how they've been allowed to do this stuff. A lot of people argue that they don't have the constitutional authority to do what they're doing, and they don't, in my perspective. But can you hear me okay?
Yep. Okay,
great. But yeah, traditionally, schools, colleges, and universities, they've been adjudicating and investigating, really low-level stuff like plagiarism and underage drinking, and that's why traditionally the judicial system has kind of turned a blind eye to these schools. But what our schools have done is taken that inch and they've run a mile with it. And so what we really need is, a new set of legal precedents that turn around and say, hey, you've gone way too far with this. Just because the Department of Education comes out with a guideline doesn't mean that it's the law of the land. It doesn't mean that it's constitutional. Where this will ultimately be decided will be the courts. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I have a question about that too, because I wonder sometimes if we might not need to spare some level of compassion for college administrations, because the scenario I've got in my mind is that they get a ruling from Department of Education that says basically either you comply with these kangaroo or sponsoring and holding these kangaroo courts, or we're going to yank your federal funding. And at the same time, there are ideologues active on their own faculties and within their student body to bring forth complaints that they have not investigated rape cases to anybody's satisfaction, even when they have, because this is the politics of victimhood. This is how it works. So they've got pressure from that side to go after the young men, and now the young men are starting to respond with lawsuits. So it would almost seem to me like college administrators are in this position that no matter where they turn, they're screwed. And certainly, if I'm a college administrator, I'm going to turn to the place that I'm screwed where I'm not screwing somebody else. And right now, it's just easier to screw these young men than it is to deal with these ideologues or to tell the government no, or be one of the colleges that stands up and sues the government over dear colleague. It is kind of a tough spot for them, isn't it?
You've asked an interesting question. My sympathies are mixed. Ultimately, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. The only choice they have to make is whether they're going to be damned for the right reason or for the wrong one. Unfortunately, a lot of them choose the wrong one. And, that works out for them better than it would doing it the other way for now. But in the future, once we gain more and more momentum, it's not going to work that way anymore. And also, when it comes to some of these administrators, some of these administrators had their, feminist youth experience themselves. They've been, it's not like they're bystanders. They have been, a part of the problem themselves as well. Many of these Title IX coordinators, they were, a part of the feminist conversation. They were not asking incisive questions, 20 years ago when they were in their early 20s. And now they're in their mid-40s and their early 50s, and they're a Title IX coordinator, and there's this huge culture that has been built up. And all of these regulations that are now coming down on them are the results of them not asking questions when they were young. And so, my sympathies are limited because it's like, it's like they're feeding this rabid dog on their doorstep. And so long as it runs off and mauls someone else, they're okay with it. But as soon as that dog turns around and starts biting them, all of a sudden it's a problem. My sympathies are limited to those types of administrators. I don't feel that sorry for them, and I think that's a justified position.
You know, I got criticized for this, but I know exactly what you mean. When I think it was just a couple of years ago, Judith Grossman penned an article for the Wall Street Journal about her son that was dragged into one of these tribunals, or they were in the process of doing it. He happened to be lucky. His mother's a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And the next she did, Mama came to the rescue and she got him out. But the fact of the matter is, I read her article in the Wall Street Journal, and she talked about being a card-carrying feminist, and all of a sudden the outrage. And it's my first reaction was, "What, you didn't notice? I mean, you're in the middle of the feminist establishment. You're an attorney. You have been a card-carrying member of NOW, involved in gender politics your whole adult life, and you didn't notice anything wrong until Junior got his ass bit.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, what on earth has happened with feminism?" And I wrote an article that was highly critical of her outrage. And there was some criticism of me for doing it, but I found myself with very limited sympathies for people who suddenly notice a problem when it's a problem for them.
Yeah, well, one good thing that I can say about Judith Grossman is that she, unlike a lot of these administrators, she's actually trying to go out there and make a change. You know, she's part of the group Families Advocating for Campus Equality, or FACE, as it's called. I think they do some good work. But these administrators, you know, they're not like that. They're they sit there and they're basically caught in between, between the hammer and the anvil. But they don't make the right choice. And so there's, even if the light starts to turn on upstairs, they can make a challenge. They can challenge they could suggest, if the Department of Education does an investigation, they can suggest to challenge the constitutional authority of the Department of Education. It would take a hell of a lot of guts for them to do it, but they don't. They could reach out to us. They could reach out to A Voice for Men. They could reach out to me. But they unless you have some experience that I don't have, I haven't received the first Title IX coordinator reaching out to me saying, "Hey, what can I do about this?" What about you?
Well, no, my reception on the college campus wasn't particularly warm. I mean, it was for the advocates there, but there was a lot of mudslinging going on and a lot of repression of speech that was attempted around that. So we're still far from the problem. I should say, though, that I do need to credit Judith Grossman for the fact that she didn't just stop with defending her son, that she moved on once she recognized the problem. I still think it was on her for not seeing it and not noticing it, but she did move on from that point to actually do something instead of say, okay, my son's okay, and now I'm going to go on about my business. So tip of the hat to Grossman for that. Mm-hmm. So what are the plans now? You've got A Voice for Male Students. It has you write some absolutely outstanding articles, and what I want people to know is that Jonathan is a mild-mannered, very friendly, warm guy. But his articles, is there an alter ego in you? Because in your articles, you come out swinging, and you write more like I talk sometimes. So what is with that? Do you just save your anger over the issues that you struggle to get attention to for the pen when you're writing about the problem?
Well, it kind of, I watched, it's not like there's well, I guess you could almost say there is kind of like not necessarily like a Heisenberg type of alter ego.
Oh, Heisenberg's cool, man.
Oh my God, yeah, I almost thought, someone complained that I was doxing, even though doxing is usually posting like the home addresses of people. I've never done that. But someone complained about that I was doxing them, and I almost thought about putting up something with Heisenberg saying, I am the one who dox, or something like that. Kind of a parody on, I'm the one who knocks.
Yes, I know.
and it would fit well because I'm a former teacher and things like that. But really, I tend to save a lot of my invective, if you will, for the teachers and for the administrators who seem to make it almost an art to deliberately miss the point and to just either be incredibly stupid or incredibly bigoted. Yeah, they do deserve mockery because there's no reasoning with them. They do deserve criticism, and they do deserve accountability. So yeah, I mean, we are 30, 40 years into this problem, whether it's educational achievement, whether it's men and boys being singled out and railroaded out of schools, one way or another, not just with there were sexual harassment policies forming in the 70s and 80s, but we're really deep into this problem, and there's really no reason to be to indulge these people any longer. There's no justification for it, and so I do think that there is a place for presenting sort of I guess I would call it an academic approach. Taking a look at what teaching methods are best for boys, even in ways in which it doesn't really intersect with a larger moral battle per se, even when it's not a struggle of good versus evil. But there is a genuine good versus evil kind of struggle, and we have to acknowledge that. So.
Yeah, that is another question I'd like to ask you. It is to do with style. We've witnessed, and I think you probably share this opinion, we've witnessed some very, very great people over the past few decades that have put a lot of effort and energy into trying to have a reasoned, nice, friendly dialogue about issues. And my opinion is that as hard as they tried and as brilliant as some of these people were, they didn't get very far. And it seems that with this particular ideology, that we have to take off the gloves and deal with the evil that's being done. We got to remember that, when you accuse somebody of rape in this culture, despite the fact that feminists claim that we live in a rape culture that condones rape and everybody, I asked the audience in Kennesaw, who was behind rape in the audience, and nobody raised their hand. Nobody even knew anybody that supported rape, and yet they still say we live in a rape culture. But when you accuse a young man of rape, you can destroy him. There have been suicides over rape accusations that were false, and society tends to just sort of put on blinders about that and look the other way. And so there is more and more people seeming now to stand up and ready to take the gloves off and say, this is a battle that we got to fight. And I still encounter a lot of people that say, no, Paul, no, you've got to sit down and have a latte and scone with the feminists and talk about the future of gender politics. And I'm like, face palm to a serious degree. Do we have to take off the gloves? Do we got to duke it out with these guys? Is that the only way to get there, or is there some other way that the world's been hiding from us for the past half century?
Well, I think we at least all need to have the capability to have a reasoned discussion. We saw that, what I did when I went to, the conference at Kennesaw State University. I really just tried to lay out as best I could, a lot of the issues, and I wasn't really overtly attacking, even though I would be well warranted if I were to do so. But really, I laid out a lot of the issues in a rather academic and I think a very humane and relatable kind of way, which is what a lot of people said. But the reality is, like, I think it's interesting when people talk about the psychology of anger. People say, "Oh, well, I don't want to do this because I don't want to talk about it because it makes me angry, or I don't want to be in a movement where occasionally I have to be around people who are angry." I think that I'm a pretty I almost want to say happy-go-lucky guy, but I would be lying if I said that I didn't have periods where this stuff makes me angry, and it's not the anger that's the problem. It's it's really, the conflicting worldviews that are the bigger issue, I think. There have been some occasions where, I've seen a feminist be angry at something where I think it was an obvious injustice, and I've said, yeah, I'm kind of angry about that too. It hasn't been too often because, unfortunately, feminists tend to make so much stuff up. But no, there have been genuine occasions, and I haven't felt wrong at all for being angry about that. Nor have I faulted those feminists in those particular incidences where they were angry. But some people can be angry, can curse. But the issue, if the issue is right, if they're on the right side of the issue, I give them a pass, especially if the issue is deeply entrenched, if the problem is deeply entrenched, and if people are just committed to not listening while at the same time, innate being a part of the problem. Some people can say, righteous truths with anger, and then some people can say, horrible, villainous things, in a very smooth, calm tone of voice. I'm more concerned about the latter group, the people who can say the most horrible things about, dismiss the humanity of entire groups of people, and say that as though it's something they say, while they're ordering a latte or something, like it's just part of their everyday speech. I'm more worried about those people than I am, and also I kind of think, that, if you aren't angry about some of these issues at least some of the time, I kind of think that that's a problem, because if there is something that is a genuine injustice and that is deeply entrenched. I think that any reasonable human being should have a certain, proclivity toward anger at genuine injustice, and to the point to where if there weren't any kind of anger, that's more problematic than the presence of anger. So.
Well said. I agree with that totally. Let's see now. And I don't want to give anybody. I want to talk again for a moment about Kennesaw, because it relates to what you just said. It relates to the question that I asked you. And I don't want to give everybody the wrong impression. If you go read Jonathan Taylor's writings, you will see he has no compunction whatsoever about stating very blunt, very uncomfortable truths in a very direct way. It's pretty fearless writing, and it's something I admire a lot, because I do think we need more of that directness in this culture about what the problem is. But at the convention, at the conference we did in Kennesaw, Jonathan's talk was more academic. It was more just laying out facts to people and letting them examine them. And about, toward the end of the conference, after I spoke, we had a feminist who jumped up and had an absolute conniption fit about the whole thing. And she said the only one she liked was Jonathan, which I could understand. Jonathan gave a fantastic talk, and it was extremely informative. But she went on to attack every other presenter at the conference who happened to give a little more provocative type speech. And what I took from that was not that we should all go to that first speech style so that the feminists would be able to tolerate it, but that what she was saying was, don't get uppity. And that's what I felt like the message was. And she came across with this message that, and this was a woman that was my age or thereabouts, that was saying, I couldn't report being raped when I was a teenager. Well, that's bullshit. We've been putting people in prison for hundreds of years for rape. Men don't like rapists. A very small percentage of men are rapists, and there are plenty of people with badges and guns only too happy to throw them in jail and forget about them. It's just an uncomfortable experience. But what I got from that was that was a pretty good little miniature psychodrama of the whole thing that's going up. Is as long as we appear polite, they will listen, and then they'll go on about their business like they never heard anything. And the minute that we start putting emotion or provocation into the talks, then boy is up, because she was going after Professor Janice Fiamingo, Karen Strawn, and me too, She spread the dirt around evenly as it was.
Mhm.
It made me think I want to be more provocative. It did, and I don't say that to be funny, but it's like if the only response that we get is the sort of the polite nodding of the head and moving on down the street, then that isn't helpful. I want to read something good. I'll go read one of Jonathan's pieces or one of any number of people that know how to drive a point in so that it sticks and you can't just walk away from it not thinking about it. And so I hope to see a lot of more of that. I see we're getting close to about the end of our time. Let me ask you, is there anything that out of this whole area of men's education or really anything that you want to say that I haven't asked you tonight or that you think is important, maybe that people just know about you, because we're going to be seeing a lot more Jonathan Taylor in the future in this movement.
Yeah, and particularly I want to say this to college students who might be considering, speaking out about men's issues. It's and particularly, Sage Gerard, he talked about, he was hoping that people would step up and take over the leadership of KSU men. The reality, the understandable reality, is that a lot of students are afraid, and that fear is understandable. But the reality is, it's if anyone, I just want to say, if anyone ever said, any men's advocate who has ever done anything meaningful, if they had ever said that they were never afraid while they were pushing forward and going on anyway, if they said they were never afraid, they would be lying. We have all been afraid to stand up and speak out at some point in our lives, and really, there's a certain mentality that at this point it's a job that needs to be done, and we're going to do it anyway. And you know what? We're gonna grin and bear it, or we're gonna get through it. And you know what? And I honestly got to say that whenever I was challenging the Title IX coordinator at my own university, I was recording some of our conversations and posting some of the bad things she said on the internet. I was terrified, but at the same time, there have been very few times where I have ever felt more alive in my life as when I've been actively, fighting for something and putting myself on the line. I've never felt so alive as when I have done that.
Same experience here, Jonathan. I think I'm going to go ahead and close out, and I want to offer a couple of things quickly before we log out and go on about our business. But one, I think one thing that's important that for students to understand and to really get is that when talking about feminism, you're not talking about a movement. You're talking about the establishment. It is, we had an expression in my day for the establishment. We said the man, that this is where the power was. And I encourage you to ask yourself where the power is. Where's the orthodoxy in your school that tells you how to think and what to believe? Is it coming from your peers, or is it coming from the people that control your university? And I think most people, when they honestly look at it, will see that we have a corrupt academic culture that preaches a lot of fraud academic garbage and passes it off as honest scholarship. And that is the establishment doing that. That's what my generation and other generations rebelled against. And unfortunately now, a lot of young people are hoodwinked into believing that this is still a struggle for equality, that it's a movement for equality, when it's really not. The other thing that I want to say, particularly to young men in college, is that if you get railroaded, I hope a year from now somebody sees this video that has been put through an unfair, lack of due process event at their school and says, you know what, screw it, I'm going to sue. I'm not a sue-happy person. I'm not litigious. But when it comes to stripping you of your constitutional rights, when it comes to ruining your educational future over a pointed finger and no evidence, sue, sue, sue. Get a lawyer. Do what you have to do. Ask your parents for help. try to scrape up the money, see if somebody will take it on contingency, go into Jonathan Taylor's database at avoiceformalestudents.com where you can look up the lawyers who have experience with these cases. And you might find one in your area, and go after the school and make them pay for what they did to you and make them reimburse you for the part of your future that they've stolen. As Jonathan said, the settlements that they're giving are getting larger and larger. And there will come points that the settlements get so large that schools start gambling and start doing trials. And then that's where the cameras come on the process and all the facts, because in settlements, one of the things that always happens is a non-disclosure agreement where you just walk away and the school's immune. When these things start getting to trials and the facts come out, things will start to change and some justice for young men will be restored on our college campuses. Then we can start looking about the issue of why there's so few of them and why they're falling out like flies and what we can do about that. With that, I want to say good night to everybody. Thank you, Jonathan Taylor, for agreeing to do this interview. Really enjoyed speaking with you, enjoyed meeting you for the second time. And traveling with you, it was a lot of fun, and I look forward to doing it again. Everybody take care. If you like what you see, please give us a subscribe and a like on this video so to get passed around. It really does help. You want to say good night, Jonathan?
Good night, folks. Thanks for watching.